everyone. I'm Caroline McKinnon from the Inclusive Research Collective, and I very, very warmly welcome you to the first of the Small Talks for Big Change seminars. These events are a collaboration between the Perivoli Africa Research Centre, or PARC, and the Inclusive Research Collective, and they're a series of 6 30-minute sessions where we begin to look at the many layers of power imbalances between research collaborations between the global north and researchers in the African continent. We very much appreciate that 30-minute sessions are not going to be enough time to deeply dive into the very multifaceted issue that arises from power imbalances between these collaborations. However, what we do want to do is through these events is firstly to introduce the various layers of inequality, ranging from epistemology and how theories and models are initially developed, up to funding imbalances and the decisions of what types of research will be funded and who will carry out the research and be acknowledged for the work, and also the decisions made by funding bodies as well as to where this work is carried out. We'd like to use these sessions to get feedback from you, the attendees, on what topics you would like to discuss further in a more substantial piece of work in the next academic year. And secondly, we'd like these events to be able to form the ability of attendees to form a supportive network of equitable research collaborations. So although we encourage and support honest conversation, as a polite notice to everybody, we do expect our speaker and other attendees to be treated with respect at all times. So failure to do this will result in you being removed from any of the events. The events are being recorded for colleagues who can't attend live and to allow for language translation. And for anybody who would like closed captions, please click on the button that says CC at the bottom of your screen to enable this facility. And please put any questions in the Q&A or chat for afterwards. So for this first session, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Isabella, I can't speak today, I'm sorry, Isabella Aboderin, who is the director of PARC, established in 2020 and funded by the Perivoli Foundation. PARC represents the University of Bristol's cross-disciplinary commitment to championing transformation in research and partnership to advance Africa's achievement of its own aspirations. So I'm going to pass over to Isabella so we can hear more about the fantastic work that's underway within PARC and briefly our plans for the future sessions as well. So Isabella, I'm going to pass to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Caroline. And hello, everyone, also from me, and apologies for the delay. I'm going to speak faster to ensure that we stay within the 30 minutes that we've got. I'm going to share my screen because it might be easier for me to speak to you through a PowerPoint or with a PowerPoint. What I want to try and do in the next 15 minutes or so, and I'm trying to put on the, can you see?
Yes, we can see that.
Great. What I want to try and do in the next 15 minutes or so is to share with you, and very much, you know, as a way of setting the scene and a bit of a frame for the subsequent seminar series, for the subsequent seminars in this series, is to briefly speak about PARC, who we are and what we are for, and then really focus on what really is the heart of our endeavor, which is to move beyond the thinking about equitable partnerships when conceiving about research collaborations between Africa and the global north. And I will focus on the core concern, which is the overall positioning of Africa and global north in the global science and research ecosystem, and the imperative that emerges from that, which is a need to rebalance the system as a whole. And then really the hope of moving towards research collaborations that can be transformative. In other words, that can perhaps advance such a more systemic shift. And then I will move from there to speak briefly about how we've configured the small talks, the subsequent small talks in the series, to speak to some of the issues that I will have raised. So, Caroline, you've already made my job a bit easier by sharing that PARC was established in January 2020 by a very generous donation of the Perivoli Foundation to the University of Bristol. And what was remarkable about that donation, and I think it's worth emphasizing that, is that we were given a blank sheet of paper to really think about what we want PARC to do and to be and to stand for. And so what I'm going to present to you now is the product of our thinking, not just our thinking, but our thinking importantly together with partners, with colleagues in the continent about where and how PARC really needs to add value. So what we are for championing transformation in Africa research and partnerships to advance Africa's achievement of its own aspirations, as Caroline has already mentioned. And this means that we are explicit in saying that we need, when thinking about research collaborations between Africa and the global north, we need to move beyond the present equitable partnerships thinking that I'm sure many of you have been engaged in, some of you even perhaps actively. So let's just have a look quickly at the present equitable partnerships debate and thinking. So as you will have, many of you at least will have noticed, there is really an intensifying debate around the need for equitable global south, global north research partnerships. And accompanying that intensifying debate, there has been a proliferation of practice-oriented frameworks. The most recent is the one by UK CDR and Essence, or the Association of Commonwealth Universities Toolkit, which are all aiming to equip researchers and institutions with the tools to configure research collaborations that are fairer. And the focus of these, both of the debate and of these frames, is hugely important. And it is, if you like, on four main areas. It is around questions of the division of labor in research collaborations. So who develops the methodology, who decides on the conceptual framework, who does the analysis and the theorizing, and who does the data collection, for example. Decision-making around research foci, around aims, methodologies I've already mentioned, budget allocations, and at least in some spheres, in STEM perhaps in particular, the use of samples once they've been collected. Issues around the capacity building that many collaborations involve and that typically are focused only, or for the most part, on capacity building for the African partners. So a unidirectional focus of capacity building efforts. And then lastly, and very importantly, the need for greater fairness in access to rewards of collaborative research, in particular in terms of the authorship of publications. And across all those areas, there has been a recognition that on the whole, for the most part, African partners have been disadvantaged vis-a-vis their global north counterparts. So these are hugely important areas to consider. However, there is more. And as I mentioned, we need to think beyond these four areas. And I'm trying to, there we go. And we need to, when thinking about going beyond equitable partnerships thinking, we need to start with thinking about the overall positioning of Africa and the global north in the global science and research ecosystem. And we need to recognize that these asymmetries in the practical arrangements in collaborations that I just spoke about and that the equitable partnerships frames are really concerned with, that they are symptoms of the wider, the more fundamental relationality of Africa and global north in the global science ecosystem. And this relationality is really one that positions Africa unfavorably. And if you look at all the metrics that we have available today, they paint the same picture, which is the disadvantageous positioning of Africa in this global science system. So here are just some metrics from the UNESCO World Science Report. If you look at data around researchers and outputs, you see that Central, East, Southern, and Western Africa in 2018 contributed 10% of the global adult population, but only 0.7% of all researchers globally, which is the lowest percentage of all major regions. And the same picture emerges when we look at scientific publications, where Africa was responsible for only 1.6% of all scientific publications. And half of those were from South Africa alone. And as you can see, these figures compare very unfavorably with those for other regions in the global south. The rankings, all of you will be familiar with rankings, paint very much the same picture. These are the latest rankings from QS 2023, which show that no African university is within the top 200. The highest ranking institution is the University of Cape Town, which is at rank 237. And the next rank, the University of Johannesburg, is at 412, and the American University of Cairo not far behind that. But I think perhaps the more important data point here is that only 5 universities, of which 4 are in South Africa, are in the top 500. And outside of South Africa, Egypt and Tunisia, no African universities in the top 1,000. And at the individual researcher level, we have very much the same picture. Of the more than 6,000 highest ranked globally in terms of citation, only 12 are affiliated to African institutions, 9 of those in South Africa. So this gives you a bit of a picture of the positioning of Africa in the global science system. And what we are concerned with is a need to recognize that this positioning, is not just an accident, and it is not benign, it is profoundly problematic. And there are 3 reasons why we say so. The first is that this positioning, as I said, is not an accident, but is the product of what we could describe as an uneven playing field in the production of scientific knowledge. And this uneven playing field is a legacy of colonialism and is defined by multiple layers of power imbalances in knowledge, in scientific knowledge production. And this heuristic really tries to capture what we see as these multiple layers of power imbalances, beginning at the very core with imbalances at the epistemological level, the hegemony, the dominance of Western epistemologies, the marginalization of ways of knowing from the continent, closely linked to the dominant use of Western languages in the production of scientific knowledge. And as you know, language really is the locus of knowledge and meaning making. And so this is hugely significant. Very closely linked to that, or arising from that, is a layer of imbalance that has to do with the dominance of theories, concepts, constructs defined and developed in the global north that underpin the generation of new scientific knowledge. And, their dominance is accompanied by what Pauline Ntonji, a scholar from Africa, has called extraversion, which is an orientation to the global north, to the West, as the site of scientific theory and knowledge production. Linked to that is another very important layer of imbalances that is captured in the logic of the development frame, which so often underpins research collaborations between Africa and the global north. I'm sure you all recognize that. And this development frame really does 2 things. One, it imposes a unidirectional gaze, again, from the global north to Africa. So Africa as a site of intervention and investigation by scholars in the global north. And this unidirectional gaze is hardly ever returned, perhaps in comparative exploration of issues that occur in both parts of the globe, and hardly ever is that gaze reversed. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the development frame really constrains, if you like, or limits the areas that are deemed relevant for inquiry in the continent. Of course, many of these areas are relevant, but there are many other areas that are not captured in global development agendas, and many ways of understanding problems that are not captured in the global development agendas that really fall outside and do not get to be researched and investigated by African scholars. And then these layers together give rise to what we see at a more concrete level, which is the huge disparities in resourcing of higher education institutions in Africa, in the global north, resourcing and capabilities, including infrastructure. So these layers together really constitute an uneven playing field when it comes to the production of scientific knowledge. So that's the first reason why this positioning of Africa in the global science system is problematic. The second reason is that this positioning undermines Africa's wider and longer term, including strategic prospects. This is because a nation's or a region's position in global science, in knowledge production, really is foundational for its economies, for its soft power and global influence, and in many ways also the flourishing of its societies. So this has, long-term negative repercussions for the continent. And the third reason why the positioning of Africa in global science and this uneven playing field is a problem is because it deprives all of us, the global scientific effort and the global scientific community, of the pluriversality, the multitude of perspectives, approaches, understandings that we need to properly advance human flourishing and to tackle, the pressing, almost existential challenges that we face as humanities. So all of this, leads to one conclusion, really, which is that rebalancing the global science system overall is really an imperative. So ensuring that African scholars, African institutions, and knowledge produced in the continent take their rightful place in global science is an imperative. It's a matter of social justice, if you like, even restorative justice. It's a matter of advancing the continent's wider aspirations for progress on a global scale. And it's a matter of strengthening our collective effort to sustain humanity and the planet. So how does this now link to research collaborations? We need to recognize that if we agree that there is an imperative to rebalance the global science system overall, we need to recognize that global North Africa research collaborations have the potential to be leverage points for advancing such a more systematic shift. In other words, they have the potential to be transformative. And why is that the case? Well, there are two main reasons. The first is, if you look at the data, that such collaborations actually dominate and define Africa's research effort. So more than 85% across regions of all scientific outputs produced that include the continent are actually arising from international collaborations, mostly with Europe and North America. So this really, these collaborations make up virtually all of the research that goes on in the continent. So that's the first. And the second is that these collaborations reproduce these multiple layers of, for the most part, there are exceptions, of course, but for the most part, they reproduce the multiple layers of power imbalances in knowledge production. So if we think about the potential of collaborations to be transformative, what does that mean? It means that collaborations, to be transformative, they must actively seek to redress and be deliberate about redressing these multiple layers of power imbalances in knowledge production, in addition to the asymmetries in practical collaboration arrangements that the equitable partnerships debate and frames, really highlight and have started to redress. And what we want to do in this small talk series is to unpack this more, I think that's the right word, to unpack the layers, these multiple layers of power imbalance in knowledge production. And at the end, we want to share with you developments around a new charter framework that we are developing together with African partners, underpinned by a loose coalition of all major African higher education players, which really seeks to provide a mechanism to advance such a transformative mode of research collaborations and ensure that it becomes embedded as standard and good practice or best practice. So we will start in terms of the subsequent talks. We will start with a talk, I think in April, which speaks to the asymmetries in practical collaboration arrangements. So very much the focus of equitable partnerships debates so far. And then we will dive down and look at the second talk. We'll look at imbalances in terms of epistemologies, in terms of language, and in terms of the theories and the concepts used for the generation of new scientific knowledge and the extraversion that goes with it. The third talk will speak about imbalances that are captured or that are manifest through the development frame and gaze. And then the fourth talk will speak about the more concrete imbalances in terms of institutional resourcing and capabilities. And then the fifth, as I mentioned, will share updates and thinking around the development of this charter framework for transformative research collaborations. So I will end here. I have no idea how long I took, probably too long, but I hope that was useful. And if there's time, I really look forward to your comments, reflections, queries, critique. Over to you, Caroline. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Isabella. I find this really, really fascinating, and the model that you've produced here as well, with all the different layers. And sometimes I look at it and think, okay, so as an individual, what can I do that will make a difference? And I think to the attendees as well, I think it's really important to maybe get the point across that as individuals, there is always something that we can do.
Yes, correct. That's very true. So actually, you raise a very important point. One thing is to set out these issues in more abstract and conceptual terms. The other is to work out what that means in practice. If we talk about redressing these layers of imbalances, what does that mean in practice? And this is really, a much wider movement, and much more thinking and trying out has to happen in practice in order to ensure that we progressively work out how best to do this. And the hope is, Caroline, that with our work, through our work, including through the debates, through the exchange, through the reflection that we can foster together, including with all of you, that we begin to develop ideas about how this can be done in practice, what each individual scholar can do, what institutions need to do in terms of changing policies and guidelines, what the wider community needs to do. So it's a complex movement for change that needs to happen. And it must begin with conversations such as this one today and joint thinking around these questions. So when we unpack each of the layers, we will certainly make sure that we include a reflection on what redressing the layer might mean in practice, and where areas are that we really need to think about further and much more deeply. So I hope that makes sense, Caroline.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Something's come through in the Q&A. Will some scholars based in Africa be invited to give talks in the upcoming small talks? their reflections, given that they experience these inequalities personally than we do based here in the global north.
Should I answer that?
Yes, please.
Yes, yes, a resounding yes, indeed. All our speakers will be from the continent. And, you know, they, as I mentioned at the beginning, our work really is, I think I can say, truly Africa-centered, which means that we work in all the intellectual work we do and the engagement with and through our African partners. And so this series 2 will be featuring only speakers from the continent who will be able to talk to these issues in ways that we perhaps cannot, based in institutions here in the global north.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think that's the most important part of this series of talks as well. So thank you very much, Isabella. The next session that we have planned is on Tuesday the 18th, and that's when we're going to start discussing how we can address practical imbalances in research collaborations. The booking for this event is now open on Eventbrite, and a link to that has been shared in the chat. So please do go there straight away and sign up for the next event, because I'm sure your appetite has been well and truly sparked after this initial talk. If you would like to know more about PARC or the Inclusive Research Collective, again, there's been links put in the chat, so please do feel free to go and visit those web pages or contact us for any other information that you would like from either PARC or the Inclusive Research Collective. In the interests of time, I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to finish there for today, but I would like to thank Isabella again very much for a fantastic session and for setting the scene of what we know is going to be a very interesting and important series of events. So thank you very much to everybody for attending too.
Thank you very much, Caroline.